edit third-person character will get you to the third-person character code. So here you can see how we handle the Z event for opening the emergence overlay, but you can also see a special thing we do on begin play is we bind to the emergence service or emergence singletons on cached persona updated event. And what we do is we get data about the new persona, e.g. its avatar ID. We feed that into a node called avatar by ID. Then once that has completed, we get the avatars, some data about the avatar. We put that into a string, and then we call get data from URL, which is a special node that we implement in Emergence that just lets you get arbitrary data from a URL as bytes. And then we feed those bytes into a special node called activate VRM mesh from data. And what this is basically doing, just to give you a high level, is we have when the user selects a persona's avatar, it is added to it's given a special avatar ID. You can get that avatar ID, you can add that to you can send that to avatar by owner. When that returns, you can get the avatar's URL, get the data from that URL, and then feed that data into activate VRM mesh from data, provided that avatar is a VRM, which they should be in this case because we only show VRMs in the persona avatar picker. So keep in mind, obviously, all of this right now is happening inside of a client, like the client side, you can imagine. But you can totally imagine that if you wanted to do this in multiplayer, all you really need to do is when the player when the player loads their persona as part of your multiplayer game, you would send the avatar ID to the server. Or you could literally have the avatar ID be on something that's replicated, like you could have it on the player controller. So you set the you know how you can set variables to be replicated as part of a multiplayer game in Unreal. If you don't, I'm not going to explain it here. It is kind of a little bit outside the scope of this. We can certainly dive into it more in a later workshop maybe, but that's kind of like teaching you how to make multiplayer games more so than teaching you how to use Unreal. But basically, in Unreal, variables can be replicated relatively easily. So what you would do is you would put the avatar ID on the somewhere where the user can send it. The user's client can send it to the server. Then the server would tell all the other clients that this player has this ID, and then all the other clients have to do is they can literally all themselves download the data about this avatar from the avatar's location, wherever it's specified in the metadata on the blockchain themselves. They don't your server doesn't need to send the avatar to all the players. You can do it like that if you want. Like you could totally have it so the server gets the player's avatar, and then it gets the bytes and sends the bytes to every user, which is totally possible and you could totally do. It just means that you're going to be transferring a lot more data from your server, and I don't know how it would if the server would handle replicating that much data in a nice way. Because usually it's designed for replicating very lightweight game data, not like 20 megabyte VRM files. So personally, if I was implementing in this, and I sort of already have done this before, or at least thought about how I would do this before, because at one point we were making a sort of multiplayer example project thing. Yeah, I'd just replicate the avatar ID strings, and then get each client to read the avatar ID string for each player and pull down their avatar. That's how I'd do that. Yeah, so I'm not sure what you meant by client-hosted environment. If you mean like peer-to-peer, that is kind of the same, where you just need to make sure that somehow the avatar ID string gets to each player, and each player knows which player sent it. That's basically it. And then as soon as you know that, you can go, okay, well this player's avatar should have this um VRM associated with it.
I could chime in on this well.
The other thing is, like, you might want to have an event for when they change their persona, because depending on how if you implement our overlay and you let them open the overlay whenever they want, that means they can technically change persona whenever they want. Now, obviously, depending what game you're implementing this on, you might, like, if you were making like Street Fighter but with VRM avatars, then you might not want players to be able to switch VRM avatar mid-fight. You might want to, like, listen for the event of a persona change, but maybe not actually implement the persona change until they get back to another screen or something, or maybe just don't let them open the overlay mid-fight. It's kind of up to you on how you implement. You deal with players changing persona whenever they want, or not changing, or preventing them from changing persona whenever they want.
Actually, that's
Yeah, let's have a look. So next question. Next question. That's super looking forward to Unity. Would this multiplayer structure work for Unity and WebGL, which is what I'm building? Yeah. So, yeah. So in Unity, we're not fully supporting WebGL yet. We are actually working on it ourselves, because we need it for something. But yeah, WebGL's coming. Would this structure work in WebGL? In theory, yes. I can't imagine any reason why it wouldn't. I guess it's yeah. I guess, like, anything that like, as far as transferring VRMs around, anything that any way that you make it work for one client, like as in single player, anything you make it work for single player, in theory, you can sort of make that work for multiplayer if you just think, okay, how do I get the information about which avatar is associated to this client to the other clients. The other clients can then download the mesh, right? That's basically it. Unless you were referring to something else. I don't know if that.
Yeah, I think that's good, Chris.
Tell me if that answered your question.
Yeah,
I could not hear pending. I can see he's flashing.
Oh, that's me now asking the question, but pending
Hold on,
was on
maybe
before.
I need to restart.
I think Chris can't hear anyone.
that's weird. Can you hear me now?
Great.
I can hear you pending.
Okay. Yeah. That's actually the thing on the the multiplayer for listen servers, peer-to-peer. I
Yep.
think that was it. That's actually what Boonshing, my project, is built around, and it was fairly straightforward. It's just I actually completely skipped over the ID and just went directly to the URL or the URI,
Oh, yeah.
and just trigger the event like I also cache the URL to the save state so that they don't have to log in every single time they start up. So
Nice.
I have them log in once, then it'll go into like a profile or like a save. You could have multiple ones if you want to set that up. Save the URL, and then on begin play or on possessed or something, you could just trigger the hey, we're getting we're getting the data from the URL, and then we're applying it to the emergence VRM mesh in your character blueprint. Um, if you do it that way, the server's doing it anyway, so all the clients will do the one that's associated with their character. So that's a really simple way to do it. Just to make it easier, I just set it up so that emergence overlay for activating VRMs can only be done in the character selection level. And then when they load into a level, they'll just load whatever they have in their save state or their save game. But that's like a really
So
easy way to
are other
do
clients
it without
retrieving
worrying too much
this?
about replication.
Yeah, are the other clients receiving the save state information from each other client's save state in that case?
Yeah, it's basically just like literally passing through it's probably not the most elegant way to do it. It's just literally passing through the URL, whatever it's triggered from the owner, to a server and then a multicast. Basically, it's really crude, but it works.
That sounds right, yeah, because with the WebGL at the moment, you've got all the data like packaged and then uploaded to whichever server hoster. So like I'm using Netlify and I've used GitHub before as well. And then each sort of avatar or persona has a unique identifier, same as Chris was saying. And then each client retrieves the ID of the persona or can change it or can change variables of it. So then each client has their unique identifier number and their persona with their attached unique identifier, and each client collects the mesh and texture data from the cached project file. And then that also has a save state, which is quite good for each client. So I've seen with different car games and shooter games and space games that I can configure different vehicles and personas and then restart the computer, turn it back on, and the cache will load up that same save state data and be configured in a multiplayer setting. But I guess it would just be changing that to retrieve from a URL data, and then that would be assigned to that active players or that client's unique identifier, which is then broadcasted to other clients to retrieve that URL data. Would you have to have like a potentially if statement? Because I've got like a fallback model where I might have like one model locally and then the option to retrieve models from a URL, which would be using, Emergence. But if, say, someone wanted to play who didn't have a wallet connect or didn't want to use a stored asset or they didn't have it, so you're trying to use it as an onboarding tool, so they could use like one of the locally made models which would already have an identifier set. Or would it be better just to have everything URL based and not have any locally stored avatars? So you'd have like if URL saved model then retrieve, or you'd have if no URL model retrieved then use local default model.
I think that's completely up to what your game is set up. I have an Unreal Engine like kind of game character for my game, but the option to load in a VRM locally that's not replicated, a one from the emergence overlay, and then another option if for people that might not even have a wallet and they just have a direct link, for example, then they can just enter the URL and then just load it in from there as well. So it's kind of it's a it's very much whichever one is toggled, and then when they're in game, they can switch between those. And instead of caching the data, I've kind of opted to just a lot of these VRMs are lightweight anyway, so I just load in them whenever they switch over every time. It's probably not ideal, but it I don't have to deal with like caching different files. I could just say, all right, just download it and just replace the emergence VRM mesh.
That's cool, man. Thanks. That covers everything I was wondering about. Really nice.
You're welcome.
Cool. Yeah, hopefully I wasn't talking over you too much earlier.
All
Yeah, is
good.
there any more questions?
Very keen to see the new features, but
Y
that's I've been deep into it, so
Yeah, I mean, I can show some of that. Yeah, I guess we can talk about them for a little bit. So, let me screen share again. So, oh, okay, Discord was a bit didn't like that for a second, but we're good. So, everything new can be found. Well, everything newish can be found in Emergence Futureverse. So, there's stuff like get future pass inventory, which is like get inventory by owner, but it gives you the contents of their future pass inventory, which is like a mixture of Ethereum and RootNet. It's basically only Futureverse NFTs. It comes straight from their indexer. You can also do future pass inventory by collection and owner, which basically you give it a list of collections you're interested in and a list of owners you're interested in, and you can get that information, just that information. There is stuff like uh, uh, get future pass info cache from Emergent Singleton, which is going to give you their like rootnet address, their original address, and then any linked addresses, because you can on the future pass thing you can like link multiple different wallets to the same future pass so that you can like get all of the different weird, like if you've got like a load of different accounts, different wallets that have futureverse assets in, you can collate them all, I guess. So that's useful. We got futureverse asset tree. So this takes a token ID and a collection ID, and it returns you an asset tree. And these are used on stuff like races. I hope that that is not something that's NDA. But what this comes out as is a ID and objects. So in this, you can find like a specific object, and then you get like ID and additional data from there. Basically, you use like a pair of these two IDs to like they're kind of like the useful bits of the information. To be honest, most of the time. But what this lets you do is like if you've got a customizable asset on Futurist that uses asset trees, you can read the links between those customizations. Because um, if if you've looked at races, the way they work on RootNet is that you have like the car body, and then you have the wheels, and then you have the spoiler, and then you have all the different parts of the car are like a separate NFT that like when you transfer it to RootNet, it sort of like splits off of. You can like you like fragment the car into these parts, and then you can like swap the parts around. So this is how you would like read what the car body is connected to, for example. And then there's also I'm typing on chat. There is also, and now my Unreal is bugging out a bit. I hate it when the demos don't work. something. It's not letting me right click. I don't know if you. Oh, it's sort of letting me right click now. Okay. It's letting me right click, but it's kind of like really. I don't know if that's coming across, but it's like not working. Anyway, ARTM. There we go. So you have this one, which is send Futureverse Asset Registry transaction message. So what this allows you to do is, again, it's not Unreal. I might have to restart Unreal, but basically, high level overview of this is the way that you update the asset registry, the asset registry's asset tree is you send one of these, and basically what this allows you to do is make an array of ARTM operations. And an ARTM operation is basically it allows you to create links. So each like link is usually like the address and token of another NFT, and then it is like you have a name for the link. So for the spoilers, it's going to be like the wheels. Let's say it's like I don't know. The link might be called linked asset wheels, and then the actual link data itself would be a link to the wheel NFT that you're using for that car. And then the message is just something you want to show to the user, because the way this works is it sends a signed transaction request to the user's wallet, and then when they sign that, this is going to send that the output of that signed message, the actual signed message itself, to the asset registry server, and yeah, it basically does the entirety of an ARTM for you. It's super cool. So those are the new Futureverse things. There is also stuff like, if you go to project settings, if it'll let you. Okay, well, in project settings there is also a oh, actually I've already got project settings open. Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, there's a you can switch the overlay log and type between Wallet Connect and Futureverse, and if you switch it to Futureverse, it changes a couple of things. So it will mean that when you log in, it will actually check if you have a Future Pass, and if you don't have a Future Pass, it's going to, instead of logging you in, take you to a screen that says, "Hey, you need to register for a Future Pass," and then it will like direct the user to the Futureverse website, and then they'll get directed through that, and then they'll go back to Emergence and go and try and sign in again, and then hopefully they'll have a Future Pass that time. But also it changes the overlays inventory to be the Future Pass inventory, so only showing their Futureverse assets. It's basically, if you're developing a game for Root Network and you only expect Future Pass holders to play the game, I'd probably say switch to the Future Pass version. If you want to be allowing anyone to log in with just a Wallet Connect connection, then you're going to want the Wallet Connect style overlay. Excuse me. You can, all this does is change how the overlay works. So if you implement your own overlay and you just are using our QR code, then like if you're just using our QR code system but you implement your own overlay, this won't affect that really. So you can sort of implement it however you want. Like if you want to have it so you go into our overlay and you get a FuturePass inventory. You don't get the FuturePass inventory when you log in with FuturePass. You just need to modify our inventory blueprints to do that, or just build your own overlay. So that's a new feature. Other than that, a lot of the new stuff is just stuff that's sort of like on the back end, like relatively hidden from the user. We hopefully have improved how reliable wallet connectors. Although, as you saw today, there are a couple of bugs still with it, seemingly around writing to smart contracts. But hopefully those should be fixed within the next few days, I hope. So, yeah.
Is there any chance you could quickly go over that high-level view of the connecting a downloaded model to an animation controller? I was just thinking of things like races and the Atom cars, because they use basically like a mechanoid rig, we'd call it in Unity, and then the bears and rabbits use a humanoid type rig. Because what I've previously done in like Snapchat and Instagram and Unity is having like one single master armature, and then you just have all of the different mesh components parented to that, and then you can have them like indexed and called upon with the JSON file that contains the token ID. So you can have, like, I've had stuff where I've had a user like manually input a token ID, and it just references the JSON file, which is normally pulling the master script off cloud rather than through like a URL get. But I was just thinking about how you would have a user import a model from the URL and import the meshes, and it would bring in the armature, but then how that would get connected and synchronized to the animation controller.
Yeah, so with VRMs, a lot of the things with the VRMs is that like the benefits of it for at least us is that we don't really have to deal with how it works as such. We just know that it works. So what you can do. So one of the things that we provide is or one of the things that VRM for You provides, should I say, because keep in mind the VRM support in Emergence is brought via the plugin VRM for You. So one of the things it provides is basically a built-in system that allows you to take VRM style data and automatically apply it to like the Unreal style skeletal mesh, but you can also have that basically re-rig to any sort of skeleton you want, in theory. Basically, like sorry, what was your question?
I think you basically answered it. So it's like a script or a string set up to automatically assign the armature to the animator, which is easy to do in VRM, because when I've loaded VRMs into Unity into different streaming software, it's about as simple and one click as it gets. They just work straight away. Even in like Blender as well, you import a VRM armature, and all of the components are modifiable and workable. Whereas like normally with Unity it's FBX files, but there's often a lot of issues around whether it's like a control rig or a deform rig, and if there's twist bones or there's not twist bones, and how that affects the hierarchy, and then connecting that to the animation controller. And if there are twist bones and a deform rig, it's like it's automatically populating it from the hierarchy, but there might be like 2 or 3 extra root parent trees, so that it kind of misses a few bones. And transforms as well, because FBXs, they can come like rotated X flat 90 degrees, or they can come rotated Y 180, so they're backwards, and so you have to kind of convert them into like a standard format.
I could share a little bit of my workflow, which is a little different from the Emergence sample project, but it's kind of specific to UE5 if you're interested.
Yeah, absolutely.
I could actually.
I've been wanting to get into UE5. It's just that I need a new laptop because it loads too slow on my old RTX 3050. So I just mainly used Unity because it loaded faster. Where I
Oh,
wouldn't have.
that's a shame. I can't share my screen. I actually have a project up with some of the retargeting stuff happening.
Oh, cool.
Um, but yeah, the cool thing about um, the VRM for you, at least, is it's built around uh, having a master VRM and an invisible VRM in the character blueprint, and that one is the one that's actually uh, that you that you're kind of retargeting all the animation from your game skeleton, like your Unreal Engine 5 skeleton, over to that invisible one. And then VRM for you does some black magic underneath to force the emergence VRM, whatever is loaded in, to force to use that invisible VRM's animation blueprint. So
Actually,
there's one
sounds quite
VRM that's
similar
invisible that
to.
just works and is mimicking the movement of the Unreal Engine, and it's
Yeah,
using IK retargeting.
sounds like
And then
avatar
when
streaming I've done before. Yeah, where you've got like an
yeah, and
invisible
what's
mesh that's just a middle
yeah,
ground between the target and the source.
Yeah, and what's really cool is because the VRM for you, even if the rigs are completely different, because the VRM for you or VRM file format itself is it's like it retains all of the weirdness of, like, let's say it's a completely different rig, but the whole process of converting into a VRM requires it to map the bones to the VRM standard. Um, which is a more simplified kind of skeletal mesh, like bone naming convention. So then VRM for you, the plugin, uses that to say, oh, hey, this is the corresponding bone for this one. And so as long as you have a correct VRM, everything should just get transferred over. If you do IK retargeting, there's going to be weird stuff like, do you have to worry about the scale? If you have very precise like hand locations and stuff, maybe you want to strengthen the IK target strength, or if you do it too much, things might break. So it's going to be very specific to like what your use case is. But at least that's the way that's been really helpful in Unreal Engine 5, because you don't have to worry about a lot of like remaking a whole animation blueprint just for the VRM. You could just run the IK retarget in runtime,
Yeah,
and it
sounds
mostly
perfect.
just
Thanks,
handles
man.
itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really cool. And then you can apply smoothing if you need to that invisible mesh. Because when I was doing heads, tracking is like really good, but anything with like arms and body, not using VRM, or VRMs are heavily smooth, but when I've done like FBX, like webcam body tracking, very like shaky and jerky, so you might add some Euler or Quaternion smoothing, but it's trying to get enough smoothing so it's not shaking, but not so much that there's like a 3 second delay on the actual movement output. But
Oh,
this,
actually, you're reminding me. I should actually do that for mine.
I add some
Actually,
smoothing. Yeah.
yeah. I have XR Animator and like Rococo feeding into
Oh yeah.
Boonshing so that people can just like swap over to motion capture mode after, like in gameplay if they want to.
Cool.
But there's always a good amount of like jitteriness from a lot of those
Yeah.
solutions. So yeah, I should
It's
look into
amazing how
that.
much
Thank you.
cleanup work you have to do in like Rococo and mocap animation.
Oh
And
God,
it's
yeah.
and even like using deep motion AI when I've uploaded like video and then it puts it on the basically a control rig, which is just like the default robot man. Um, the robot man control rig looks really smooth, and then when it gets transferred from the control rig to the target avatar, that's when you start getting weird like transform deformations, and it took more time to do cleanup than it would have done just to animate it from scratch. And that's for like a rendered thing in Blender rather than real time in Unreal Engine. But even with a good suit, still quite a lot of work to do.
Yeah. But yeah, I hope that helps.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, and you reckon it'll be similar with a vehicle? Because now we've got two types of vehicles, which even Chris has shown with the Emergence SDK and the Asset Register. Because you've got the racers cars made of parts, and then we've just got the Atom cars that have recently been released. And I've made a couple of WebGL game demos, but it's only using one car locally. But the idea would be to have that someone can get their own vehicles from their own wallets to play the same like a drift racing game and a space shooter game. Um, but I'd
That's
potentially,
that's interesting. So are you guys using the VRM as a skeletal
We
mesh
only
for
got
the car?
a GLB file, but I had to convert it to an
Oh, okay.
FBX because GLBs don't transfer animations well in the game engine. But just
Right,
import it to
right.
Blender, then I have to unpack all the textures and then remap the textures with UV coordinates to all the materials, and then export that as an embedded FBX. And then I can just drop and drag that FBX straight into Unity, and it'll appear with all the materials and textures intact. But if you just upload the GLB and export an FBX, it won't have any materials because they don't have UV texture coordinates. So you sort of have to unpack them, remap them, repack them, and embed them, and then
Right,
export it as
right.
an FBX.
I think you also have the option of saying maybe the on-chain or like, the IPFS repo version doesn't have to be as fully featured,
Mm,
as fully featured as what you want to display in game. Like it could be, I don't know, another
close enough.
approach, the lazy
Yeah,
approach would probably just say, hey, I'm
this.
gonna just have a GLB that doesn't have any animations on it.
Yeah.
That's the asset. But in game, I'm gonna just read that exists, and I'm gonna just assign something that's
Mm.
already packaged in the game, that is
Can you
high
read
fidelity and
material or texture files only and not meshes? Because one thing I did in Lens Studio when we were making the Snapchat lenses is you can only have like 8 megabytes locally, like on a lens, but you could have 20 megabytes in the cloud. But the Blender master files are about 500 megabytes. So we just took the texture maps of the base color and used a common material that had the roughness metallic in the normal map. So we basically just had like one material for like the face, hair, eyes, nose, mouth. And then I just had a script which swapped out the base texture color, which essentially changed the entire model's look because you'd have like gray,
yeah,
black,
yeah,
blue.
yeah. I do something similar on my end as well, and also for some collections that have been out and that I've just been a fan of, like Clone Force or
Oh, yeah.
uh, uh, the driver collection, the helmets.
Yeah.
I just have the wallet check if that item is in their wallet, and if it is, it's just going to show up in the game version of the inventory in like an emergence quote unquote chest,
Yeah.
where uh things that it's like the old school PlayStation, oh, you played the previous game, well, here's the armor for,
Nice.
kind of like playing on that idea, and the helmets will just be in their inventory, their emergence inventory when they
Yeah.
log in.
Because the
And
local
that's
way
like
I was
just
looking
a
at it is,
packaged
yeah.
helmet that is just retextured, and it's not even a GLB or anything. It's just
Oh,
a
yeah.
packaged
That's
item
cool.
in the
Yeah.
game, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, because the local way would just be to get as many different community users' vehicles as possible, and then just export the base texture map from the main texture chassis, and then just convert those to a 512 JPEG, so they're down to like 23 kilobytes, and then you can have like 100 of them for like 2 megabytes, which is not too bad. And then just attach that to like the indexed token ID. But it would be easier if there was like the URL get function, if you could just get the material or the texture map files for a person's
Yeah,
vehicle.
I've thought about vehicles as well, because I do have sorry for
That's
just
right.
like rambling on too much, but one thing I would kind of recommend is I think it's really cool if like different games in the ecosystem had, like, let's say you're gonna have different driving mechanics. Like mine will be hoverboard and completely different dashboarding controls.
Yeah.
So I think game specific is like dashboard or inside the car in the chassis. But the frame outside, like, just the shell of the car is more of the cosmetic part that can be interchangeable.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's a really cool approach, because then you could just take the GLB, doesn't even need to have animations or anything on that. Just bring that in, and that's kind of like the quote unquote skin for the car that's interoperable. It's
Hmm.
I don't know. I think that's an idea I've been playing with. Just have
Yeah.
the cockpit and everything, and then
Quite cheap to do resource wise
Mhm,
because
mhm,
I
mhm.
think there are 13-ish atom cars, and all you need is like a skinless mesh for each one, which you can even put like LODs or decimation on them as well, or even simplify them by removing some of the trim and accessories. Some of them got lots of like piping inside them, and like they've actually got like a modeled engine under the hood. But unless you open the hood, you don't see the engine, but there might be like 8,000 polys just with the
Right.
engine and the tubes under there. So you could take that out and just have a skinless mesh. But the car controller I'm using is quite modular, so it has presets, or you can change like the acceleration, max speed, braking power, turning power,
Oh,
traction
that's
or
interesting.
slip. Yeah, so you can actually have like presets of basically like pickup truck, drift car, drag racer, rally
If
car.
you make that as an object, one GLB with an object with multiple parts, for example, and then
Yeah.
you just standardize where the outside chassis, like the visual side is, where the engine is, where the seats are,
Oh yeah.
right? Each of those are separate objects. Different games should be able to parse through and say, I'm only going to render one or
Cool.
import like asset layer one or something, and that'll just be the shell, and then they
Oh
could
yeah,
like
layers. That'd be
make
the
that
way to
work.
do it. Yeah, thanks. Because they're
Yeah.
all attached to the armature, and so you can just filter out different mesh objects attached to different bones in the armature, and they're all kind of like divided into three. So there's like door hinge, door panel. So you can have like the whole door open, you can have just the hinge open, or you can take the panel off. Which I guess if we're making like a car repair game, like a car repair sim, you could then have those different component parts of it, and the inside of the engine is the same. So you can like raise the hood, lift the engine, rotate the engine within the engine bay. So you imagine like a crane dropping an engine bay down is able to rotate the engine, but it's attached to the armature. Um, but having them as separate
Yeah.
importable mesh
The
objects sounds even easier.
the only thing is bringing it back to like the VRM thing is that uh the VRM is mostly kind of a what do you call it? Like a highway for sharing avatars. So the more you go down into things that are specific, like custom armature stuff for the car, it's going to make it more difficult for people to kind of interoperate with it. Which is why I always kind of like defer back to like the simple implementations first, and then
Yeah.
it can kind of like trail on. People can build up on it as it goes into practice, I guess.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of why I was thinking if you could just import mesh objects or materials on the same indexed mesh object. So that way you could have your own custom armature that has the original mesh objects and the right nomenclature and indexing, and then call a URL to bring in other people's mesh objects, which would basically just reparent to your modified armature. Um, which is what CodeMonkey does when he makes like, and who's the other guy? Jason Wyman, who did some MMORPGs with Sony, where he essentially has for 220 player characters, NPCs, and enemies, one armature and one animation controller, but he uses override layers. So you've got the same armature and animator for humans, orcs, elves, dwarves, goblins, anything humanoid. But he has override layers for the mesh components and the animation clips to make them then look different. But he said that was quite resource efficient because he just used classes as layers to say, yeah, if it's a goblin, then do the crazy walk half bent over in this attack animation sequence.
Yeah, that's really cool. Actually, a lot of that is really it's becoming standard now in Unreal Engine 5 to use like instance anim layers
Yep.
where you can swap out like big chunks or even the whole entire like bits of your animation blueprint to just not have everything loaded in memory all at once. But sorry, I'll just like defer back to Chris just to make sure that we're on track and we're not hogging the conversation too much.
That's awesome. Thanks heaps, man.
Thank you.
I think I've got to go pop off to bed now. I've got an early start tomorrow. Thanks heaps, Chris and P. Peckham? Doesn't tell me your name. Just says P dot dot dot.
Oh,
Well, thanks heaps.
pending reality.
Pending reality. Thanks heaps. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for coming.